going into this, I was anticipating enthusiasm from people, especially if it was successful, and it has been so far. And I was anticipating, wow, like I want to try this too, sort of reception from people. And there has been that to a degree. It has resonated with a lot of people, and a lot of people are finding hope through watching my experience through this. But there is also quite a large subset of people who are feeling quite upset by me sharing this journey and shifting the focus of the channel more towards using this kind of alternative method of managing my schizoaffective disorder using the keto diet and metabolic therapies.
Lauren Kennedy West of the YouTube channel Living Well With Schizophrenia has been on a metabolic health journey using ketogenic therapy and metabolic health therapies to help put her schizoaffective symptoms into remission. So you would think that her community would just be standing up and cheering and being so supportive and happy for her. Well, some yes, but actually some no. There have been some negative comments and pushback that we want to dig into a little bit more and talk about her whole experience. So let's get on with this interview with Lauren Kennedy and with Hannah Warren. Welcome to Metabolic Mind, a nonprofit initiative of Bazooki Group, transforming the study and treatment of mental disorders by exploring the connection between metabolism and brain health. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for joining me and Hannah again here today at Metabolic Mind.
Thanks so much for having me again.
It's our pleasure. I mean, it's been so exciting to follow your journey on your YouTube page since you've started your ketogenic therapy, and throughout the whole thing, your honesty and just sort of the raw nature of sharing everything you're going through has been very evident. And you've obviously had some amazing changes and some amazing benefits from your ketogenic therapy, which we encourage everybody to go to your channel, Living Well With Schizophrenia, to watch the videos and learn more. And I don't know, Hannah and I have been talking about this. We would expect sort of that people would be coming out of the woodworks to just be so happy for you to use the words that your schizoaffective disorder is in remission, just to be able to use those words. Everybody should just be screaming from the rooftops how amazing this is. But yet there's been sort of this underside that we've noticed, that people have been sort of upset with some of the content and lashed out a little bit. And I guess I just want to start by asking you, how do you feel about that? I mean, it seems like that must, to a degree, really hurt. I'm curious how you're dealing with that, how you feel about it.
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a process, kind of trying to process that response. I think that, yeah, going into this, I was anticipating enthusiasm from people, especially if it was successful, and it has been so far. And I was anticipating, wow, like I want to try this too, sort of reception from people. And there has been that to a degree. It has resonated with a lot of people, and a lot of people are finding hope through watching my experience through this. But there is also quite a large subset of people who are feeling quite upset by me sharing this journey and shifting the focus of the channel more towards using this kind of alternative method of managing my schizoaffective disorder using the keto diet and metabolic therapies. And at first, I think I was just really taken aback, and I didn't understand, and I was confused as to why people would be upset with me trying to take measures to empower myself to take care of myself better, or to improve my mental well-being or my physical well-being. And that was confusing at first, but I've done a lot of reflecting and digging through, and yeah, I guess I can share some of those insights with you guys, but I've come to a place of more, I guess, empathy for where people are coming from in terms of feeling maybe even a little alienated by the content or feeling left behind in some aspects. And yeah, I'm feeling more empathy for it, I guess.
Yeah, I'd love to get into the specifics, but first, Hannah, so I mean, you went through a similar experience where all of a sudden things just dramatically changed in how you were doing, and a lot of it was based on your metabolic therapies. Now, you weren't as public about it. You didn't have a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of people watching your videos, but I'm curious if you felt something similar, if there were sort of two camps, people who were supportive and people who were maybe a little more negative about it.
Actually, interestingly, in my own personal life, I really pretty much only got positive feedback. All my friends and family were really supportive of what I was doing. Nobody was critical. It is entirely different when you're putting yourself out there publicly with your story on the internet, which is something that I had never done before and didn't even anticipate that I would do. And obviously now with this opportunity at Metabolic Mind, I started to share my story publicly. And interestingly, the first time I got any negative feedback whatsoever was when I did my interview with Lauren on her channel. And I also was just really surprised because the criticism came from other patients. And I was thinking if anybody should be empathetic and celebrating, especially knowing the depths of despair that we've had to go through, the challenges that we've had to face through this illness, and being able to find a way to live such a better life. For me, I'm happier and healthier than I really ever thought was even possible following my diagnosis. So I naturally thought this is such a hopeful message that's going to resonate with people and make them realize that things really can improve. So it was pretty shocking to realize that it was other patients who would come out and say things that, oh, she's a time bomb. She's definitely going to have another manic episode, and just all of these completely negative comments. And of course, I think for me, my initial reaction, seeing that the first time, I was a little bit hurt. And I think also because you realize with this form of treatment, kind of like if someone had cancer and they treated it, like I had a metabolic dysfunction, I was compromised metabolically, and I'm now in remission. That doesn't mean that I could never have another episode. I mean, people, even something like an infection, something could cause me to have an issue again. I have to be really vigilant and monitor my health, and I never take it for granted. And I try to just live with optimism and to be happy every day, to be grateful every day that I'm experiencing such a good quality of life. But I'll be the first to say, like, I don't know if I could ever have an episode again. So just that idea that other people would almost jinx you and talk about it in such a negative way. You can't imagine someone being like, I'm in remission from cancer, and people come out and they're like, well, it could come back.
Oh my
I'm
God.
like, well, that's nice.
Oh, that's such a strong analogy, but gosh, it brings it in such a different light. But so you've both used the word empathy, but Lauren, you said you're now you're having more empathy towards the people sort of reacting negatively. So I'm curious where that comes from, and how you got to that point, and where is that empathy from? Do you think that for them?
Yeah. So I think that, something that I've talked a lot about on the channel in past years or in past content is the idea of acceptance and how important working on that is in terms of managing and living well with a chronic illness like schizophrenia. And acceptance has been such a big part of my own journey in terms of coming to a place of accepting that, I got to a place where I accepted that this is just something I'm going to live with for the rest of my life. And there's always going to be a degree of struggle or suffering, I guess, to do with living with this illness. And so when you come to a place of working on that acceptance and it kind of becomes inwoven into your identity and your conception of what your life is, when you see someone who is perhaps appearing to break free from that struggle that you have come to a place of accepting that you are just going to have to experience for the rest of your life, that can feel maybe a little bit alienating in the sense of almost being left behind to a degree, especially when you have this it's a parasocial relationship that people have with me who have been watching my channel for 5 to 6 years and, feeling a sense of connection with me over a shared struggle or shared suffering. And so then for that connection to be broken in some way because I am no longer in that place of suffering, I imagine would feel really, really difficult and probably scary and hard. And they probably feel a little bit angry at me for leaving them behind. And I understand where that feeling is coming from. I guess where I hope people will eventually get to is realizing that, she empowered herself to take these steps to improve her situation. I could do something similar for me. Maybe it won't look exactly the same as what she did to do that, but I have it within myself to make changes or make choices that are going to improve my own well-being.
Yeah, and I think so much of it comes back to that concept of what you said earlier about maybe like an identity. Even the words we use, if someone says, I'm a schizophrenic, right? That's like, It was different than saying I'm living with schizophrenia. And so Hannah, did you notice that sort of identity part in yourself too? That like I'm not the bipolar girl anymore, or was there part of that?
Well, that's what I have to reflect on as I listen to Lauren's story, is that I think it must be so intense really to share this journey publicly, because you are going through such a deep personal transformation of your identity at the same time that you're sharing it. So I can imagine sometimes reading the feedback in real time as you're trying to figure out like who you are now and where your life is going with kind of this massive change. It must be difficult, because I process so much of my journey just kind of quietly in privacy with friends and family, and not really having to put myself out there in the way that you are. And definitely for me, I think there's a lot of growing pains and healing, kind of that post traumatic growth that you go through so much and then you come out of it. And it's really exciting. It feels like you can fulfill so much potential that was kind of stymied before. And there's so much that's open to you now that you thought, never would be again. For me, it was kind of the first time where I got back to baseline and saw myself as being the person I was prior to my diagnosis. And then realizing that many of the tools that I used to transform my life meant that I'm even stronger now than I would have been if I never had my illness. So it really is empowering, but there's a lot of layers, because there's grief for lost times and the things that you maybe were never able to accomplish because you were unwell. And there were some really important things I felt like I missed in my life, and a key part of my life, kind of in young adulthood, late 20s, early 30s. So I think it's a real process of kind of reconciling with the things that you lost and the difficult things that you've been through, but then also the excitement of realizing how much the world has opened up. And I guess for me, the most empowering thing became just realizing that I could play a role in helping to get this message out there and inspire and empower other people. And when it comes to the identity issues now, or being a public figure, which is something I never really thought I would necessarily be comfortable with, even, I think I just always have to micro focus on like those success stories, So when I even read through the comments on some of your videos, those ones that stand out where people say, I've started this, I'm seeing incredible results alongside you. I mean, any number of people whose lives that you can touch, who can experience the benefits that people like us, we have no question that this is a real powerful intervention, because we've seen it work in remarkable ways, with you being on the lowest dose of medication that you've ever been on, that in the past, you ended up needing to be hospitalized on that dose. And for me, I'm almost at 3 years, not needing to be on medication, just using metabolic therapies as my sole form of treatment, something I was told was impossible, lifelong chronic illness. To get to that point, you don't question the validity of the science. And of course, as we have more research showing, the mechanisms, the biomarkers, really helping the rest of the world to understand that this is a valid scientific treatment, it's just incredible to know that we're putting out information that can be really life-changing for a number of people. So I think always focusing on those positive stories and realizing, maybe not everybody's going to accept that message or be ready to hear that message, but just think of the massive ripple effect of those people whose lives you do touch, who maybe are able to move on with their lives in a way that they never imagined was possible, kind of just like we are.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, I guess we started this discussion talking about the negatives, but what about those positive responses? Like, how have those made you feel, that people sort of changing their lives along with you? How's that been?
I mean, that makes it all worth it. That was always the goal was, well, I guess the goal was to find something that would help me improve my experience of my illness, but then sharing it publicly, the goal has always been to hopefully help others find a similar path. And so to hear of others who have been inspired to try it themselves and have been successful is like everything I could have asked for.
Yeah. But so what do you think though about it being sort of a nutritional and lifestyle intervention as opposed to a medication intervention? So as Hannah mentioned, it's not that you're off all your medications, but what's been new has been the lifestyle and sort of quote unquote diet intervention. Do you think people are reacting differently because it's that, instead of just, oh, I started a new medication and I'm feeling so much better?
Yeah. Starting this, I didn't realize just how much there was going to be to unpack in terms of factors at play, in terms of people having like ingrained feelings about things. And yeah, people have some very, very strong feelings about talking about diet. And that is it's a heated topic. And, there's reason for that. There's been a lot of kind of toxic diet culture that has been enmeshed within how we talk about fueling ourselves within society for a long time now. And so I get why it's at a point where people just don't even want to go there, and they feel very protective of their right to eat a certain way or whatever, and whatever it may be. But yeah, people get really defensive, upset when you bring up diet as an intervention. And that, like I said, there's a lot of different reasons for that. But yeah, like I think people are very quick to just kind of write off something like diet and lifestyle changes like exercise and sleep and stuff as just being, oh, it's just placebo. Like there's no way that could be as effective as medication. Medication is backed by science and what doctors prescribe to you, and that's the only thing that's going to help you. And so it has been kind of a big ask to ask people to really kind of challenge the current status quo of psychiatric care and what we've been taught. It means to be a good patient. It means to be a good patient to take your meds as prescribed. And, like that's what it means to be a good patient. And so I think a lot of people also take pride in that, in their compliance, I guess, with what their care team is telling them they need to do to take care of their mental illness. And so again, that's kind of it's the word I'm looking for, kind of challenged in a way, by suggesting that you could achieve similar or even better results just by lifestyle changes.
Yeah. And I think that that's rooted, it's rooted in some truth, to be honest, because if your diet is just cutting out 500 calories, or if it's, just eating more whole grains or eating more beans, like, sure, maybe those can make you a little bit healthier, but are those going to really have profound effects? But when you're talking about in metabolic intervention that changes the chemistry of your brain, that changes the fuel your body is using, like that's so much more than just a diet. So as long as people see it as a diet, in a way I can sort of understand how they think, well, diet can't do that. And that's where I'm glad you're using the terms metabolic therapy, medical keto, because that's what separates it from this isn't a diet. But yet a lot of people just still aren't quite catching on to that, huh?
And there's also so much misinformation about nutrition that we've all been taught all of our lives. Over the past several months, I've been doing a lot more digging into the actual science that is out there on what our bodies need and stuff. And people still come at me with this information that we've been taught all of our lives of we need carbohydrates to live and we need to eat a balanced diet and, the food guide stuff that we're all taught. And understanding that came about because of lobbyists, like not because of science, is kind of unreal to me. And someone actually left a comment on a video that we posted recently with a quote that they attributed to Mark Twain. I don't know if it's actually by Mark Twain, but it made me think a lot that it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. And that just really resonated with a lot of the backlash that we're getting or pushback that we're getting about this alternative, but not really alternative way of eating and fueling your brain and your body.
Yeah, my other favorite Mark Twain quote is the problem ain't the things you don't know, it's the things you know for certain that just ain't true, or something like that. But it goes along those same lines, which just unfortunately resonates quite a bit with nutrition.
Yeah, I always wonder if there's another way to say it. I always have to say that too. Like, this is not just about diet, and it's hard to tell people. It's about how the diet triggers another state and like switches the fuel source of your body, and it's a whole cellular process that happens with mitochondria. Because it feels like when people just say diet, it doesn't do justice at all to the kind of real biochemical shifts that happen. Just like when you take a medication, that's why people will believe that like it's affecting your neurochemistry. Well, so is ketosis.
So we've talked a lot about the reaction that you've been getting and sort of how that makes you feel and how you've become more empathetic towards your audience, which I think is so important. I mean, but do you have some concerns that your audience is going to dwindle? I mean, you've spent, not that the only reason you've done this is to build up an audience, but it's a nice result, right? And you know, people can make a living with large audiences, but now that you're improving your health in a way that's maybe alienated in some of your audience, that's like a little bit of a conflict, isn't it?
Yeah, we have had many people unsubscribe, and people generally have voiced that they don't want any more keto content. They want us to start making mental health content again, which we are, but you know, um, I think I'm not so concerned about that. I think it's been hard. Like the reception, we've gotten some really nasty emails. We've gotten really nasty comments, kind of threatening emails, actually, at times. We have people trying to sabotage our YouTube channel by buying us fake comments. Um, yeah, as a means of like taking us down and getting us in trouble with YouTube or whatever. And so that part of it feels really frustrating and is maybe more of a concern. But in general, if people are really, really adverse to the content that we're creating now, that's okay. This is what I feel I need to be putting out there right now and what I feel I have an obligation to be sharing. And so I'm going to continue to share it regardless of if we lose subscribers or not.
I really appreciate that response. Yeah.
Listening to your last video, I was really just impressed by the depth of your empathy, kind of really being able to be specific about the concerns that people raise and to address them in such a respectful way, to really try to get people to think a little differently about it, instead of just further isolating them. And I think that's what's so important because we realize that this is a huge paradigm shift in the way that mental health care is treated. So taking the time to really explain it in detail and try to help people because you realize how much they can benefit. So I greatly appreciate that approach. I guess I'm wondering, as Bret mentioned, with the reaction that you're getting, it also kind of makes me wonder if your YouTube channel over time is going to evolve and the way that you're becoming so educated about metabolic health. And another thing I think is incredible is just the amount that you have provided really relevant information to anybody who's interested in doing these therapies. And it's so new to you. You've learned a massive amount, which is really impressive in such a short period of time, managed to make your videos educational and informative, but also engaging and entertaining. So I could see you just continuing to thrive in this whole new space of metabolic treatments moving forward, because I suspect this movement's only going to keep growing. So have you ever thought about maybe how your channel will evolve moving forward?
Yeah, that's kind of been like a kind of a joke concern that we've been throwing around is, oh my gosh, we're out of a job. We put ourselves out of a job. There's no more schizophrenia to talk about. But yeah, definitely. There's like, I think I'm already in a place where I know that this has been a really successful intervention for me. But, looking at how the next few months will go just to solidify that, I can absolutely see myself moving into this direction of promoting more metabolic health or metabolic wellness because it's been such a huge part of my journey and where I am now.
And one of the things I love about your journey is just, how you share so much personal information. And like Hannah said, so much is educational. But so I always have to check in and ask, how are Rob and the kids doing with all this too? How are they
Oh, they're
adapting?
good. Yeah, it was a really big topic of concern on the channel around Rob's bowel movements for a while, but that all regulated. He's doing much better now and everything's good. And yeah, the kids are doing good too. They're still not following keto, but trying to up their fats and proteins and trying to reduce their carbohydrates a little bit, but they kind of run off carbohydrates at the moment.
Yeah. I'm guessing that was a shift you didn't see coming, talking less about schizophrenia and more about Rob's GI symptoms. That's probably not
Yeah,
something you
like
saw coming.
a weird shift, but we
Yeah.
went with it.
Yeah. Very good.
It's interesting thinking about the scope too, as you evolve your channel. Let's talk more broadly about metabolic health. Because I think one of the things that struck me as I became more educated about metabolic interventions and my illness is that like metabolic dysfunction is arguably causes like all non-communicable diseases. I mean, there's a root to metabolic dysfunction. So it's interesting to think about, how many people's lives are impacted and how many people can benefit from improving their metabolic health, and to think that for me, it manifested as bipolar disorder, but for someone else, it's obesity or diabetes. And it's just such a pervasive problem in our culture. And like you mentioned, already understanding and getting a little upset about the misinformation about food and diet. And, to have had so much of your life destroyed by it personally, but then you can relate to people who are struggling with other issues that maybe have nothing to do with mental health, but are another form of chronic illness. So there's just so much scope to educate the general public too, right?
Yeah, it's amazing how much metabolic health affects. Like, I also have PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, and that has been an unintended consequence of this, that has healed, where I am getting my period regularly again. Actually, last time we tried keto was a few months before I got pregnant with my son. So it like infertility was something that I thought I was going to struggle with, but because of keto, I didn't. And keto has regulated my hormones and such in a way that I am healthier in that aspect as well, too. So there's like so much that metabolic health affects. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I just had a discussion with Jeff Volek, and we talked about this concept of you almost sound like you're a snake oil salesman if you're saying, well, it helps with mental health and it helps with type 2 diabetes and it helps with fertility and PCOS. And you could say, how does it help with so many different things? But like you said, Hannah, it comes down to metabolic health. It comes down to metabolic dysfunction being a root of so many different problems. And if you can get down to that and fix the metabolic dysfunction, so many other pieces fall into place. And that's what we're seeing in spades and so many people across so many different diagnoses. And so I'm thrilled that you're seeing such a benefit.
Also, as I mentioned, your last video was wonderful and really comprehensive. I was so impressed with the way that you addressed your audience's concerns so respectfully. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind summarizing a few of kind of the main areas of pushback that you've gotten from your audience and kind of the angle that you gave them to explain your point of view.
Sure. So I guess in that video, I brought forward a lot of the typical criticisms you get of the medical keto diet, cost, medications working, so why would you try it, triggering eating disorders and all this kind of stuff. And I just tried to share my own experiences. But I think the most important thing that I tried to communicate in that was empathy for certain areas that might be feeling particularly hard for people and why there might be that inherent resistance coming up. And so I actually shared about a podcast that I was listening to the other day with Brian Johnson, who is the billionaire who's trying to reverse the aging process through this thing he's calling the Blueprint Protocol. And he shared that he often asks people a question of, if you could have AI create this life plan for you that you had to follow, so they kind of made all your decisions for you, you had to follow this plan, but through this plan, you would achieve the best quality of life, both physically and mentally, greatest level of satisfaction you've ever had, both physically and mentally, would you do it? And when I was listening to this, my answer was like, yes, of course I would do that. That sounds great. I want to live my best life. You can make all my decisions for me. Sure, I'll be happy. But he shared that the overwhelming response to that question from most people is no. No, I would not. And so he shared some insights into why there's this aversion to that, ultimately aversion to living your best quality life, comes from a sense of fearing loss of autonomy or giving up your own autonomy. People hold that really dear to them, their ability to make decisions for themselves. And I get that. I think I share that as well. And so when that is challenged, I guess, by being told you have to live this certain way, you have to make these lifestyle changes, there's a bit of a wall that gets put up in terms of, no, you can't take my autonomy away from me. And then he also shared that there is this perceived, or I guess, aversion to loss, whereby people, and people have commented this all the time, that they could never give up their carbs, they could never give up their sweets, or this diet is way too restrictive. And they're communicating essentially that fear of loss. And I think it's important to kind of dissect that in terms of, well, what are we really scared of losing? I don't think that it it is really much of a loss to not be able to eat cookies anymore or whatever. I think what is really the loss is the comfort or the joy, I guess, that you get from that. And so once we can understand that that's the real loss, then perhaps that opens the door to replace it with something that is better for us and still be able to derive that sense of joy, fulfillment, comfort, or whatever, and not lose that, which is really what I guess the loss is, and just replace it with something else. For me, that has been spending time with my family, running, exercise, or whatever you can do to derive that feeling of comfort and enjoyment, I think is what's important to focus on rather than, well, I can't eat rice anymore or whatever it is. And so that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is just that those are really, really human things that I think are happening for a lot of people who are feeling this gut sense of aversion to the switch in content or the switch in mindset that I'm asking of people.
Yeah, that's such an important behavioral health just technique. And Hannah, you've shared so many times how you love to cook with different spices and really make sort of intricate meals. And then if all of a sudden you take away half of your ingredients, you could just focus on, oh my God, look at all these things I can't cook with. But the way you always talk about it, you present it in such a positive way about all the things you can use and all the things that the new things that you've learned. And so I think that really resonates with that way, focusing on the new, what you're going to replace it with rather than what you're losing. And gosh, that's just so powerful. Well, Lauren, I mean, all of us here at Metabolic Mind are just so excited for the content that you're putting out. And of course, the fact that you are really thriving just makes us so happy. And we just love the way you are just open and honest and so educational about your process. And so we're excited for you to continue and to see more from your journey, and however we can support, we would love to. And we want everybody who's watching this to please go to Living Well with Schizophrenia to watch you on your journey and learn from you and learn from your mistakes and learn from your successes and everything in between, which I think is so awesome. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and we also always want to be that resounding positive voice, like cheering you on and applauding everything that you're doing to reclaim your own health, but also to share such invaluable wisdom with other people. And I guess I want to share that with anybody who's watching who might be like you, doing this intervention and getting some negative feedback from other people in their lives, just that we are the champions on behalf of those people, just that to be able to celebrate well-being and healing. And I'm just so grateful for all that you're doing and so happy to see you thriving and excelling in life.
Thank you both very much.